Welcome to Talk Design Podcast, the space where creativity meets conversation. I'm Adrian Ramsey, your host, and as someone deeply entrenched in the world of design, I'm thrilled to introduce you to the minds that inspire me in the hope that they will spark something special within you too. From a design past crafting women's swimwear to pushing the boundaries of performance sportswear, from mountaineering to international yachting, to implementing systematic innovation solutions that transcend boundaries in aerospace industry. My heart remains rooted in architecture, and exploring the emotional tapestry woven by built spaces is my fascination. My journey in design has been what can only be described as a life of design. I want to thank you for lending me your ears. I'm eager to embark on this next episode together. My guest on Talk Design today is Ben Mumme. Now, Ben is from Montreal. He has an incredible podcast of his own called Living Your Greatness. And behind that, there is a whole story of who Ben is. I'm going to get Ben to share that story with you. And we're going to unwrap a whole lot of things about design. And I'm not just talking about architectural design, I'm talking about design of your life and design of your mind, design of your thinking. Ben, thank you for coming on the show. It's great to have you here, man.
Adrian, super happy to be here. And shout out to you, man, for taking the time to show up and put all the energy that you put into the show. Tremendous respect on my end.
Thank you. One of the things I think with podcasting is the fact that we get to grow ourselves, and I would say for some people maybe out of ego, but I would reckon with just about any podcaster that's done more than 30 episodes would know that there's no longer any ego in broadcasting what you're doing. You're sharing it for whoever wants to find it, and there's a really lovely thing around that because it takes effort to keep going with podcasting. And I always say to people, it's if I was the only one who listened, I always get my meal. I always get so much from the conversation, and I think that it's a lovely gift to be able to share those conversations. I think that to me is just a lovely thing. So I never look at it as a thing where it's like, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. It's about finding people who bring something else to my world and then hopefully the world that listens to the podcast and try and bring that for them. Yeah, try and bring that I'm bringing it for myself first. There is a moment of pure selfishness in there. And then there's that next level beyond that of when you get your listeners' comments back and stuff and you go, oh, far out. I never realized it touched them that way, or they got something from it completely different than I ever got. So I really put my hat onto you, like you're out there, you've done an incredible podcast, and it is always one when you turn on an episode, you go, oh, and I found you through Alison Armstrong. That's how I found your podcast originally. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, cool. So yeah, and that was a common interest thing and the way it goes. So Ben, give me and the listeners like a breakdown of started out as this little kid somewhere and what got you to today. Start with the kid.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you starting there with an origin story. I think we all have a story, right? And I also think there's never one moment that leads to where you are today. I think we're always evolving, we're always growing. But to kind of go from the origin story, yeah, I'm from Montreal. Even though I was born in Ontario, Brampton, really my whole life since 6 months, I grew up in Montreal. As I shared with you earlier, and I'm excited to share even with your listeners, I'm from a family of five. So always, from an early age, surrounded by lots of voices and characters. And I don't realize until more and more later in my life, but, there was a lot of family orientation, in my everyday life. And realizing even from my mother and my father, which I'm proud to share, I think we're always great role models both in their individual lives as well as their partnership. And I think they just instilled in all of us some really good values of just how to show up as a good person. And when I say good, sometimes when we think of the word good, we think good or bad. that's not what I'm referring to. I'm talking about values of maybe community or health or wellness, or I think it makes sense now when I look at myself and all my siblings, how when we grew up, we were always so involved in community and beyond. We always ended up being, not for the title, but we always end up being, manager of a pool or, like the president of this organization. So in terms of our characters of how we showed up in the world, we kind of led without a title. We were a human first mentality. And so, yeah, just to continue onwards, I guess, from a young age, yeah, part of a big family, got thrown into a lot of sports. In fact, I think we were all privileged, to be put into a lot of sports. And the reason why I bring up sports is it really teaches a lot about life,
Mm.
about knowing thyself, about knowing, what you like, what you don't like, how to get along with people.
Oh,
That then translates to work, to relationships. So yeah, I think like feel free to, keep pushing on the buttons here, but I think it is a good understanding to first get an understanding of someone's values or even, their upbringing of their environment. But feel free to go any way here, whether you want to continue in my adolescent years or beyond or now, I'll let you, take the direction here.
I do. One of the things was around, your mum and dad, and obviously, like out of those values that you said, one of the points there was it would seem maybe the whole family, but certainly for yourself, somewhere there must have been demonstrated this leadership capacity because, as you said, whether it ended up being, running the thing at the pool or whatever, or being the president of something, there was a natural foundation and maybe built off, I don't know, maybe built off values, maybe built off, mimicking what you were seeing in your own home. So tell us a bit about, you've got brothers and sisters.
Yeah, yeah, I
Tell us a
have.
bit about them and your parents.
Yeah, no, I'm
What
happy to
created
go
the
here.
what created the foundation block and what they did for work and their values where they sat.
Yeah, well, I think it goes again to if we take titles aside
Yeah.
of how they showed up, I think it's whether it was in family or whether it was in community or whether it was in their professions, they showed up without a title, right? They showed up, I think we don't realize, and when I say we, I'm referring to myself and my siblings, we were always known on these, sports teams of, we ended up getting the title of a C, for captain. But really it was, I think just the way we showed up, it was our work ethic, it was our, yeah, okay, leadership that you use, but most importantly, just being a good human. And sometimes that's really tough, right? Because I think sometimes ego gets in the way a lot, in any of our relationships. So I think what I would rather pinpoint is rather than what they did, really focus on, and I think it's so important for the everyday person right now to hear this, but is really to focus on, them knowing themselves, again, just like in their own individual lives, like maybe I will give an example with my mother. She is an outdoor educator, so she obviously values education. She values outdoors. But then without looking for recognition, there's so many other ingredients at the school beyond her kind of tasks of where she showcases community from within, so starting, a garden club to this, to that, but all these things that didn't exist, right? And so that came from inner motivation, right? So if you think inner, let's just say that in terms of intrinsic motivation,
Yeah.
right? And so I think both of them, like individually, like they have that within themselves. They have that competence, and I would say that leads to then confidence of again knowing who they are. Because at the end of the day, right now we're hearing a lot of good right now in this conversation, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you are or parent or mother or father or brother or sister, all
Yeah.
these titles aside, what really matters is again, there's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. How do we navigate life? And I also think too, even though I'm speaking a lot about, my parents, like if I think about even, my siblings, right? Like there's also lessons that we get, through moments where there's a lot of love and support, and moments where you're pulling each other's hair out, right? But then you don't realize, but throughout as you're getting older with your siblings, there's always like a lot of, I would say, love of challenging each other to level up to be the better versions of themselves. Because I think at the end of the day, it comes from a place of love over fear, which is like
Mm.
super, super powerful. So I'll kind of stop there. Again, feel free to continue to dance around. I'm ready to put
You're
one foot right and left.
good to go. Good to go. I really love that. And some of my takeaways from that was obviously I would say from that story you said about your mother, she would ex had the opportunity to expand people's, I'm going to say mind, that's not really it, being, their being, and being in that outdoor education kind of area where they are in touch with nature, they are in touch with the, I'm going to call it the planet, in the physical sense of it, they're on top of the ground. And when you said like, doing the garden club or something like this, so little I feel these days is focused around that kind of area. And it's almost like I see this. My kids, I'm kind of stumbling here with it, but my kids went to a Montessori school, and they went to Montessori, and Montessori was the first farm school built in Australia, this particular one. And my eldest kid, she started before they built the farm school, and she transitioned through them with the school as they built the farm school. And my younger daughter, and there's 7 years between them, she kind of just moved. That was her journey, was on the farm. And the ability to fail was really prevalent. The ability to, and in a sense of from the farm. So you put a crop in, it doesn't work, it's gone. You don't put another crop in the same next week and hope to have it the week after. It's gone. You've lost your season, or you've lost your opportunity. And one of the things that I really so appreciated with my kids was is they physically got to do things in the farm, and they could scream and yell about bugs and stuff. It's Australia, there's tons of them. But they could they got to do that. They got to manually shift things and be part of that, soil and stuff. And then they also got to see how they failed the crop, or they failed the outcome, because it was run on the law of the farm. It had time, and if these pieces weren't done right here, so they were guided to do the right pieces, but not rescued. And so then the outcome of all that was my eldest daughter. She ended up running the farm store. So at pickup, there'd be a piece where you drive in for pickup, and you'd get out of your car, you'd park, you'd get out of your car, and you'd go and get your kid and bring them back to the car. And there was a stall that they would have there, and they'd sell farm produce. Now, that farm produce money from that went back into the school. And so they could see a direct result from this to a microeconomy to how that affected a bigger economy. And I'm thinking of your mum in that context, and I'm going, oh yeah, this is beautiful. This is values that you don't learn and without experiencing. You don't get the nuances. And again, when it goes back to you were saying before about being, like a leader in sports, with that human piece of how do you negotiate these people together? How do you not even, I don't know, be the good human, I suppose, that holds the space for them, but also knows when this one's moving out of context a bit, and this one here needs to be pulled together, and keeping a team atmosphere is, maybe you saw that demonstrated by your parents, as you kids would, yell and scream at each other or beat on each other or whatever it is, but them doing exactly that. And, before we started, we were talking about being parents, and I'm like, it's always growth, and it's not always growth that is enjoyable. In fact, lots of it, my wife always says this, and I bless her for this, saying, our job first is parents, our job second is friends. Parenting is our number one job here. And Well, you tell me whether that happened in your family, if that was how your parents approached it. And friendship was, yeah, provided the parenting's all online, friendship's easy.
Yeah, well, I think you have to know how to play different roles, right? Because it's all part of it, right? So whether it's partner to partner, it's like, you should even be starting a family or even be honored to be, seeing this beautiful, human beings that you are producing
Mm.
and just being part of their lives, right? You're almost like a mentor, you're a friend, you're a parent, you're all these,
Yeah.
titles. Really, I think it goes again with how do you fill those different roles through a place of being human, right? A place of choosing love over fear. And sometimes that might be giving some, feedback that's not always fun to hear, but that's, the proper feedback to give, for behavior to be corrected, right? But then other times it's the complete opposite, which is what I think when I look back of like what I think we all got is, we were all different characters, even though we came from the same parents and the same values. I think we were all given the opportunity to be ourselves. And I think that's something more than ever that I want to see actually more people in the world who are tuning in right now to really challenge them to be, to be their most authentic version of themselves. And I think, later on, I don't think parenting is the only thing that is part of our story of who we are and who we are continuing to be and who we continue to become.
Hmm.
I've been sharing this more than ever lately, and I'm fired up to actually share this with your audience. But for some reason, and I did not get this from my parents, but for some reason, I had extreme curiosity maybe in high school, I was already reading like Tim Ferriss' 4 Hour Work Week at the time,
Really?
and
Yeah.
lifestyle design. But it's like, at the same time, I was a high level athlete, I was focused on schools, I was really involved in community. And what I'm getting at here was, yeah, I was already thinking maybe different, maybe than the everyday, I don't know, 16, 17-year old. And I don't mean that that's better or worse. It's
No,
just more
just was.
my mindset was going there. And I know when I look back, even though maybe I was similar to a lot of my athletes or, peers, in school, I was kind of unique in my own way, like I was connected to things I was extremely interested in and kind of pursuing. And I think when you go down one rabbit hole and then like the next, you don't realize, but the more that you continue to be your most authentic self, the more you fall upon experiences that are pretty incredible. And so, what I want to get to next is when I was in my first year college, which is like there's 2 years of college before we go to university after high school here in
So,
Montreal.
so you're how
Uh,
old?
so I would have been, let's say, age 17 to 18. Okay.
Right.
And when I was that age, I did again, I was curious about human motivation for some reason. And I did a huge research project on expert performance. And it wasn't about, because lots of times people want to, whether it's in investing, right? Make a lot of money, become a billionaire, or if it's a CEO of a company, they want to get to that level and maybe sell that company or create value for the world. Or whether it's in sports, make the Olympics, right? All these dreams of is this exterior motives, which by the way is great, is that truly going to bring more happiness to your life? Or is that part of your journey of who you are becoming? And what I want to get at was I was more intrigued about not the not the result. I was more curious about how do all these people with human motivation, how do they get to that level of expertise, of superior performance? And so at the time, I was reading a couple books and I was following, I'll have to find his name, but I was following a professor from McGill who had a class on human motivation. I think I watched a couple of his lectures at the time too. And all of a sudden, I did a study on again how to become an expert. And it was funny around that time, as I've already shared with you, right? Around that time, Tim Ferriss, I had just read his book, and he had
Mhm.
just started a podcast bringing on all high performers who had mastered their craft, right? So again, shows where maybe some commonalities are. And what I ended up doing a lot of research on at this time was most experts, it came from first early exposure. So early exposure of who they are as a person. So if we think about their environment, their upbringing with uh
with their parents and their family and their
yeah,
family's friends
yeah.
would
And
also
then
shape that.
and then also exposure to, whatever they're trying to learn or do, right?
Yeah,
So if you
yeah,
think of, if it's sports or if it's chess or whatever, early exposure, right? As well as your environment. And then another thing was like mastering coaching, which we don't realize is sometimes our teammates, our coaches, mentors of ours, teachers, all these extra, external influences on our life that shape who we are beyond our parents, right? So that's why it's fascinating to think, our parents are a big part of who we are, but there's actually a lot more individuals that come into our life that shape
mm,
who we are.
mm.
And then, like it comes to, the classic that you always hear, you got to put in the hours and the consistency. But I would also argue, at the same time, it can't just be putting in the hours or the qualitative, amount. You need to put in, or sorry, quantitative amount. You also need to put it in the qualitative, which is like deliberate practice, right? Always, if you're making always like the same mistakes, you need that feedback. You need to learn. You need to grow from. Again, I'm a big believer. Like every 100 reps, you should be learning so much about yourself and failing a lot to really be able to grow and really,
Yeah, yeah,
evolve, right? And so, anyways, I'm kind of now just I think what I really want to loop in here is, your parents are a big part of who you are, but there's so many other external factors. And like I could go on a list with, not only mentors that have showed up in my life or also a tribe of mentors, which is
yeah.
another Tim Ferriss, of people that you maybe will never meet, but maybe have timeless principles or, are someone that you follow their work, right? And they
Hmm.
inspire you.
Hmm.
So there's so many things that then contribute to the person we are today.
I love it. Like that piece you said there, obviously the bigger eco structure. I think, absolutely. And there's that old saying, familiarity breeds contempt. And I think that certainly in my case, I got to a point where with my parents, I was like, I think all kids do this to some point, that their peer group shifts from, or their learning group shifts from their parents to them, to their peer group, which can be
Yeah.
good or bad. But whatever, that's a shift. And I was going to ask you with your thing there before. I'm gonna say some other stuff, and then I'm going to ask you this. But at what age did that firing off of growth kind of happen for people when they got to it? So at Montessori, they taught us this thing that about 11 or 12, maybe 13, somewhere in that gap, our kids would actually stop being around us in the house and they'd migrate more to their rooms
Mhm.
and making sure that their room was like this great place because that's they're starting to move away from you as parents. And then as that would develop, they would move away more to their peer group for their opinions and their trusted opinions and things. I remember when we first heard this, we were like, oh, right, yeah, right, okay. Kind of not believing, just not having experienced it or not being able to tie it to our own experience or experience of the other kids in the families we grew up in. My wife's one of five as well. I'm one of three. But with that, I was totally unaware. I was so full of myself that I wasn't aware of whatever anybody else was doing. I was just trying to make my own journey out of whatever was going on. But with that thing that kind of fascinates me is there's a point like you were at that sort of 17 or maybe a bit younger, and you started reading Tim Ferriss and stuff, and then these things obviously shifted your platform of understanding of what the landscape looked like outside of you a whole lot more than maybe it already was developed. And with that, I remember really pivotal moments in my growth of being a human where somebody sparked that, like where, or I got put into a situation where everything shifted because of that. And I saw the world, like overnight in a different way. I got to open another window and look out of it and then step through it as like a door and then actually start living in a different way because of it. I find these things really fascinating. So when you go back to a couple of things, that 100 reps, I
Mhm.
want to ask you more about the 100 reps and the nuances that that brings out. And then also that time, that age point, and where, oh, I could go down a rabbit hole here, where at 17, 18, this kind of thing, you're kind of starting to search for the next part of you. And I see so many young kids today glued to screens and watching rubbish, just watching things that will make you laugh, not things that build 100 rep strength or not things that influence you to go to that next point. And I see parents that are lost in that journey of trying to keep their kids off, these things, and governments that are doing it as well. I mean, the Australian government's got the world's toughest social media laws coming out at the end of this year. So just yeah, this kind of piece, the 100 reps and the time, the 10,000 hours. I really loved your point there about it's got to be progressional. It can't just be, you know, quantitative, it's got to be qualitative. Is that the word qualitative? It's got to have quality in it and it's got to grow from it. And that's really ties back to sports as well. So maybe take me on a bit of a journey around those things, but from your sports background and tell
Yeah.
people about that and then how that, the nuances of those pieces layer in. Because sports always comes from a point of there's got to be a leadership point, whether it's in you as an individual sports person or whether it's in you as a team sports person or whether it's in you as a community sports person, because it sort of always steps up. And there's a lot of different areas to master within all of that stepping to get somewhere.
Yeah, I like the fact that you brought up like the step process because that goes with it's just like climbing a mountain, right? If it's your first
Yeah.
time climbing that mountain, it's gonna be pretty hard and you're probably gonna get tired and stop and fall down. And I always like to say to people learning anything, it's always like two steps forward, one step back, two steps forward, one step back. And something too that I believe, which is really, really important to hyper focus on here is I think remembering when we're growing, when we're learning, when we're putting the reps and then putting in the quality of deliberate practice, right? How do
Mm.
we, with each repetition, try and just be a little bit better? And it's that little bit that adds up and compounds over time. But there's something that I've really instilled that I feel like I'm very internally connected to, and I'll obviously go into how I apply this to not only sports in my earlier years, but even to my everyday life today with athletics. But is I believe that there's at least three to four P's that are important. So the
Oh,
first thing is you got to practice, right? And that goes with putting in time and also putting in like the deliberate, practice, right?
yep.
So that's one of them. I think another one is there's got to be patience, right? Because even if you're practicing, you got to be patient with yourself. You have to have self-compassion. You have to be human and realize, like, yeah, like today you might be tired and you might be trying to be deliberate, but it's look, I don't know, you woke up and you're human, you're tired, right? And so think about that, even like just to give an example right now, like especially when we're training and we're following a quality program. And again, I use purposely the word quality. You can't be doing PR days every day because either that leads to injury if you're running, for example, most of the time, again, if we use running, you should be training in zone one. Yes, you have your speed work days where now you're going animal mode and you're really pushing, to next limits, or other days where you're, running on an incline or you're running up a mountain, right? If you like the outdoors. So again, we have practice, we have patience because we need to have that self-compassion and realize that this is a freaking journey. This is not a quick fix, which again, whether it's our athletics or what or finance or relationships, we live in a society more than ever. And I think you were getting at this too, where we have more than ever distractions, but
Mm.
at the same time, we have more than ever tools, right, to learn and grow. So I know that contradicts. But then another one I think is perseverance. And I
Mm.
think, you could have practice and patience, but what about perseverance? Are you going to eventually give up? And I actually want to, take an example
It's such.
more out of the athletics world. But if we look at podcasting. I think you started this episode just saying how it's a journey and how sometimes, you're just talking to yourself and that you've gotten so much knowledge in that episode for you. And, you're obviously inviting anyone who's curious to hop in and join. But I
Yep.
would say perseverance in terms of we don't realize, but the first person that needs to believe in yourself is yourself. Whether you have a crowd or whether, you're alone, it doesn't really matter. Chris Williamson, who is now considered one of the top podcasters out there, which by the way, I think there's a lot of other great podcasters of
Hmm.
his level, but maybe, maybe they didn't stay in the game or maybe, they didn't persevere, which is a good topic that we're on right now. He talks about the lonely chapter. And so in anything, not only podcasting, but I'm going to stick on podcasts, to a
So
point.
yeah, it's a
It,
great analogy point that you can use for sure.
it's huge. It's huge. And it's like you have to embrace that lonely chapter. And I remember, saying to a lot of people who asked me from the beginning, Ben, like, why do you keep doing what you're doing? And well, first off, I know my core values, but most importantly, most podcasts that are out there, there are a ton of them. Most of them quit after 7 episodes.
Yeah,
Most of them quit because they don't have a team like Tony Robbins, where there's, 50 people out there, which by the way, that's amazing for him. I applaud
yeah,
him.
yeah.
But most of them are not a one person doing it all kind of thing, especially in the starting years. And so, yeah, really having that perseverance of embracing the lonely chapter and embracing everything that comes with that, because really what you're doing is you are investing in yourself. You're investing not only in your intellectual well-being, but you're also investing in your social well-being. And now you're allowing an opportunity for yourself and others to hop into that. And for me,
We froze.
beautiful to look back and think, okay, the one to where I am today, it wasn't about the repetitions, but just seeing by trying to be deliberate with who I brought on or my conversation. It's been cool how much I've created a community, not just for myself, but for others to enjoy.
Yeah. So I just had a piece there, man, where it's frozen in a second. Did I get you back?
Yeah,
It just
back at
froze.
it.
Yeah, it just froze. Sorry.
But
Um,
it
I'm
happens.
I'm going to try and work out backwards from my countdown timer
Oh,
for my
good.
editing. It's all good. I got it. Sorry,
Um,
you were saying about that piece of where the imposter syndrome, with that the lonely chapter was where you were in when it broke up a bit there. I was going to say to you with that, with the lonely chapter, have you had your lonely chapter, or is it recognizable? And when you said it, I'm going, damn, the lonely chapter. When's the lonely chapter? And that piece of having, you said about Tony Robbins having, a team of 50 behind him. I mean, I look over my shoulder and I know there's a few team members that are behind me that are doing, editing and bits like that. But for me, actually, I've never edited my own podcast, but I've always done it with one of my staff or team members, or with an external contractor.
yeah.
I just went, oh, it's not my, well, I'd never done it before. So I was like, it's not my skill set. And I've glad I've never picked it up to do it as well. Yeah, fascinating. That tell me more about the lonely chapter, because I think that's in every endeavor that we do, even probably in our self-introspection. And certainly, yeah, I can relate it to designing houses. So yeah, go tell me more about that.
Yeah, no, totally happy to dive a little deeper here. I think if you think about the lonely chapter, again, everything in life has to do with mindset. So, is there times I'd be lying to you if I was to say, no, I've never felt lonely. There's been so many times where, you ask yourself, or it echoes, which is normal thoughts, why are you doing this? Or like, are are you sure about this? But I think when your why is so strong, you're able to remember your values, why you're doing it. Like for me, I wanted to create a space, for myself that whether I had one listener or thousands or millions, that I'm going to continue to grow whenever I want to do an interview, intellectually, I'm going to grow even in terms of everything I learn into my physical well-being, everything I learn in terms of my emotional well-being. So I'm like, if I'm going for a holistic lens, and if I know my values and why I'm doing this, then it's all about enjoyment of the process, which has to do with even, the three P's that we spoke about
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
And I would also add the fourth P, which I didn't get to before, but passion. And passion, I think, goes with your why you're doing something. And so for me, I think even though we do have challenges or moments where we feel alone, I've also reminded myself, and I know this is going to sound cheesy, but because I've believed in myself and because I've known my core why of why I'm building what I'm building, then you're able to wipe away with a mindset right away and reframe that this isn't a lonely chapter. I'm in it for the long game. I'm not in
Yeah.
it for overnight success. And it's funny because I don't know if you've had this experience, Adrian, but there are moments in your podcast journey, just kind of like even in our athletic journey, where all of a sudden, boom, you get to that next level in performance. And again, it's not about the result, but then there's been moments where I use this example a lot, but I think it was last May or June, and I did another financial episode, and I had done a lot of financial interviews, and for some reason, over 2 days, there's 45,000 downloads for that episode. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of
Wow.
eyeballs,
Yeah.
especially for someone that, his audience is less than 3,000,
Yep.
subscribers, right?
Yep.
And so you have those moments where, the external comes in. But I think for me, I wasn't worried like who I am when I started the podcast to who I am continuing to be till I die. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle design if we go back to Tim Ferriss. So
Yeah.
it's like I don't care. Like I love what I do for my main profession. I'm an educator at a
Hmm.
college in physical education, and I know I inspire my students and I teach them so much more than physical education, but life, like life principles. And so
Yeah.
this also goes to when you have your main profession, which most entrepreneurs won't always highlight this human side of them, but they usually have other income streams, bringing in their financial wealth. But it's giving me the play to keep this fun and play to not just keep doing, it's healthy to have chaos for sure and being playful. But yeah, of course, you have to have, a strong vision, order, structure, making improvements so you keep getting better
Yeah.
at what you're doing, right? So then, like it is my goal, whether it takes a couple more years, that this becomes, my main profession down the road where I could solely depend on it. But I think this comes again from you got to go through this lonely chapter and you got to realize that the biggest thing is mindset is whenever you think you're alone, you're not because you already got yourself that has your back. And then if you think about it, anytime someone agrees to an interview, they're
Yeah.
also saying most of the time, I would say 90 to 95% of those people are saying, hey, we believe in you, we like what you're doing, and we see you, we hear you, and we're ready to support you. Just like you and I right now, I looked you up and I'm like, yeah, I'm happy to hop on.
Yeah. I think that's a massive piece, that piece around what motivates you to do it to start with. Mine came from, I've always been blessed in my life to have incredible people come into my life, like just amazing people. And in the very early days of my podcast, I called in on those people and said, "Hey, would you come on my show?" and all the rest. And there's been some standout kind of mentor type people that I've gone, "Oh wow," they really shifted and shaped my thinking. And one of the things there was I went with the podcast, doing a podcast was how do I take the five people I spend the most time with, the old analogy, how do I take that and expand it kind of like in a personality block? So I went, okay, so I work in my day job. My day job is designing homes, and it's custom homes, single family residences, mostly. That's most of what I do. And with that, I went, how do I learn more, A, about people and B, about that design genre? How do I do my 100 reps? How do I get more of that? And I went, I've always been blessed in the fact that there's people out there for me. So I started that journey of reaching out via different people and stuff and interviewing people around that subject. And that's probably built the basis of it. And then from that, I also have always had this interest in business. So I went to business people that I knew and asked them if they'd come on the podcast. And this thing of the different blocks of my interest and personality, where did they lie? Yeah, I'm a surfer and a skier. I'm yet to have a surfer or a skier. That is, that's what they do on my podcast. I must do that. That's a note to self. There was a bit of imposter syndrome, and oh hell, how do I do this? Or hell, why would I be worthy? Or why should I be in the room? As well, that I had to overcome. And I'm sure you've been through different parts of this journey as well. And then now I really enjoy like stretching who I might interview, like I love listening to other podcasts to learn to be a better communicator and podcaster and to get knowledge, just to gain knowledge for more of my life. I can sit in my studio and have a podcast playing with no problem whatsoever. And that's sort of, I'm learning something, maybe not fully consciously, but at least very subconsciously. And then there's moments that stand out and I'll go, oh, what was that? And I'll, lift my head from what I'm doing and take that in. And like I said to you, like I was looking up for something on Alison Armstrong, and that's how I found your podcast. And I went, oh, okay, I liked your interview style. It was different. And I was like, okay, cool. So then I'm like, yeah, thanks, Alison. When I got to the end of it, and I'm like, okay, so I want to know more about what you did. And then I started looking into your podcast and went, oh, okay, that's interesting. Oh, wow, that's interesting. And just the variety of things. And that point of everybody that you meet through the podcast won't necessarily become your mentor or a piece of it, but they all become touch points. And what I often find, and we did this prior to actually recording, you were like, oh, I should introduce you to this guy and I should introduce you to this guy. And I see it as like an expanded community and that we have a opportunity to expand other people's community, A, by personal introduction, if we have that opportunity to do it, or B, by them listening and them taking an opportunity to fill the thing. What was the catalyst for you that meant that you went from, reading, acting out on information you were reading and all the rest to going, I'm going to start a podcast? What was the point that actually tipped that over? And then how did you know what to do to get the podcast going?
I love that question. I think it goes back the first time I ever thought of starting a podcast, and I would have been a pretty smart man if I started then. But when there's this podcast came out,
No.
I was now doing literally a year later, I was actually doing qualitative interviews for my research study that I was talking about. So
Right.
I actually kind of had an experience to it. And again, I love people. Like I'm definitely a people artist.
Mhm.
And so at the time, I didn't realize I didn't start a podcast, but I already saw I'm so curious about human motivation and what makes people itch and how do they get to where they are today. And again, it's not a lot of people think results first. It was the opposite. It was the backwards approach of the process first, and then results will always come. But then it's funny how I'm so happy, even though it would have been cool, as whatever 17, 18-year-old starting a podcast, especially at that time where none of them really existed. I'm happy I didn't because I continued to pursue the person I was, right? Through not only sports, but then I ended up going to McGill University. And I think where I got the most out of my education, even though I learned a lot about physical education and kinesiology, really for me, it was, again, the people. So the
Yeah.
people I met And the amount of, I think I said it earlier, but even like it wasn't about being, the student president or, the head coordinator for these events I was organizing. I was getting so much people artistry of bringing the best of myself and bringing out the best of others. And so I didn't realize, but these were all skill sets that continue to contribute to who you are. And also sometimes through community, we're developing these very entrepreneurship skill sets. Like at the time, I still look back and I'm like, man, I was age 22 and I had $1 million budget. I was putting on this event and it had to be safe and it also had to be like memorable, like 38 universities,
Memorable for the right reasons.
yeah, totally. Because, and that's a whole nother conversation. But at the time when I was taking over head coordinator for this, kinesiology games conference, it used to be an excuse to just show up and party, right? And
Yeah.
so now it's okay, where do we find time? Yes, to party and have fun and be, the humans we were at that time, but to actually make it a really memorable experience. And so I brought like an Olympic feel and care and sustainability coordinator and all these roles to make the experience memorable. And so you don't realize, but kind of like the athletes or Olympians get like the Olympic depression. I think for me, I wouldn't say depression, but the more that I was getting exposure to that potential that we all have in ourselves, whether it's to reach a high level in sports or that high level in community events, right? You then go into the real world where I actually really enjoyed. I did sport management for a little bit, so
Hmm.
more growth of challenging, right? Of juggling all these different skill sets and learning a lot. But then to answer your question now, it started for me to start to share my voice. So I think once you invest in yourself, you start to learn a lot. You're like filling your cup.
Yeah.
And then eventually you realize you're like, wow, I've learned a lot. I still have so much more to learn, but I could already start sharing. And so first, it usually happens through our relationships that we trust, where we start sharing our wisdom. And then eventually, through some, friends that came into my life, they started writing on Medium, then I started writing on Medium because I saw, wow, like-mindedness of, they've done a lot of investing and filling their cup, and here they are
Yeah.
sharing their voice and their ideas. But then I would say the thing for me that started to really itch, at my heart, to make me really want to start a podcast was whether it was myself reaching a high level in sports or doing well in academics or planning events, for me, it was realizing that so many people have self-limiting beliefs of themselves. But I was able to see through the good, the bad, and the ugly stories of people that literally changed their lives. And so I'm happy to give a couple examples.
Oh,
But
I love it.
if you don't know already, I highly recommend you check their channel. But Yes Theory, which is a very well-known YouTube channel, and I would say even beyond that now, just they've impacted literally millions and millions of. I would say Gen Zs was probably their target audience, and probably some millennials. But I had a friend at the time that when I was at McGill, his name was Matt. And, let's just say Matt was not at all where he is today. He was a dishwasher. He was working really hard on a clothing line at the time. I still actually have it over there at the clothing line.
Still
Uh, you
wear
know,
it.
yeah, I do actually. Yeah.
I
It
love
was
that.
called Heart City. And next thing you know, picture 2, 3 years later, it wasn't about the success, but they have, let's say, 350,000, subscribers on YouTube. And next thing you know, he's bungee jumping with Will Smith off of the Grand Canyon. And just it was beyond again the exterior experiences. It was like they found a way through all their projects of taking the leap of following their heart, which
Mm.
was, hey, you know what? Mom and dad is telling us right now because we graduated from McGill to go get a corporate job. And we've decided, the four of us who started Yes Theory, to take a little bit of risk, to get creative, to essentially live out their potential. And then I also saw other stories, right? Like I said, I knew people that through family or friends that reached in. Sorry. that reach an Olympic level.
Uh-huh.
And to me, it was like there was no pedestal. It was like, oh yeah, that's just like Joe, right?
Yep.
Like, and I think a lot of us sometimes either again, I'll use the word have self-limiting beliefs of really our true potential. And I was able to see it even when I was in my last year at McGill. I talk about this story a lot to people. In fact, I spoke about it today to Gen Z. Really good, anyways, really good dude that I've been mentoring. But I said I had a housemate when I was at McGill University, and he's the second fittest CrossFitter in the world.
Yeah,
And
wow.
his name is Patrick Vellner. But again, I knew Pat before he even got to that level, and seeing how like when we talk about human motivations and early exposure of gymnastics and how open he was to feedback and growing through coaches and mentors and the discipline and the hard work and putting in the reps, it never surprised me. Like he was someone in my life that I was like, wow, this is such a superhuman type of person. So to finally, really gather back here, it's like it's never one thing that makes you start something. But for me, there was a lot of stories of people that I admired as a human first mentality and just seeing how they actually took these, I don't want to say risks, but they took the plunge, right? To really jump into whatever they were doing. And so for me, I was kind of like, I want to continue to fill my cup, to learn and grow in all these different areas. Because when you have a broad audience, your growth in terms of showcasing your vision will take
Hmm.
longer.
Hmm.
It's how it is. It's not as niche and hyper focused. But for me, I was like, yeah, but this is a lifestyle. And, I truly want to help myself and, many other people down the road beyond one box, one category.
And
So,
that kicked you off. I love it. I
yeah,
love it.
yeah, yeah.
It's a fascinating journey. I had this little realization the other day. I was doing something. I can't remember. Might have been mowing the lawn or something. And I went, it's always running through my mind. Oh, I've got this guest coming. I've got that guest coming. Oh, I need to follow up that guest. We haven't actually set a time date and all the rest and all these things. And so it's always just something that's ticking along in my mind. And I went, Adrian, you're going to do this for how long? I've never actually considered what the length of it is. If I was in a business, I'd be going, oh, well, at some point I'm probably going to retire. I don't know. Like it was this thing of, so is this, like I don't know how many I've done, 300 or so, but so is there another 1,000? Is there another what is there? And I don't see any limit to it or any lack of joy or growth or any of those pieces in doing it. No, it just suddenly occurred to me that I'd started a rest of life journey when I'd actually started the podcast years ago, but now it's a rest of life journey. And I've never had that realization before. And I was thinking about how do you hand a podcast over to somebody else? How do you broaden your podcast, like selling a business, but not selling the podcast, just bringing somebody else in that actually takes part of that and grows their journey from it, as opposed to them just starting out fresh. Or what does it look like in that context? Because it's still a relatively new business construct. And so I'm like, oh, it's a fascinating thing. I've always looked at it as like, oh, great, I'm going to interview this person. Oh, great, I'm going to interview this person. Oh, wow, I'm so excited about finding out this or whatever it is that I have for every episode. And then I was like, I suddenly got this moment of reflection of the bigger picture. And what did I unknowingly signed up to make this journey and probably past number 7, which I recorded 7 episodes before I even put an episode out, of there was no great forethought or plan of, okay, well, will you wrap this up in 2 years or will you do this with it or will you do that? Well, yeah. So I always find it a bit of an interesting thing. And I've never asked anybody on the podcast before. I have asked why they have a podcast. But like, yeah, that journey piece of, oh, well, you're in it for now, you're in it. Now you're in it
Hmm.
for, and I get people all the time who reach out to me and say they want to start a podcast. I imagine you do as well. And
Yeah.
I'm like, you go back to your 3P or your 4Ps. Those are pretty much what I
Hmm.
tell them. And I go, the perseverance will be the piece that makes or breaks you.
Yeah.
Your passion will get you across the line. Patience of growth, you'll fix that just by your own beating yourself up. Practice, you don't really ever get to practice the next episode's of practice as well for the next episode. But their perseverance, it takes effort, takes work, it takes growth. And I think that's probably my most fun journeys of the podcast.
I also want to add something there too.
Yeah.
I think we have to always think about anything that we create, right? When you're doing a podcast or let's say like that's a form of expression of
Yeah.
art, right? We always have to remember, and I'm a big believer on this of like the artist mindset approach.
Hmm.
It's like with every rep, I want to call it like with every piece of art that like honestly if you think about it it's so interconnected to who you are and what you're learning and what you're putting out there into the world and it's never going to be perfect, right? But it's always going to be like again maybe at that point in time you were seriously interested in that and learning and growing. So it's with every piece of art that you put out is to think of it like art. And I always find, I don't know about you Adrian, but I've had some friends ask me, "Hey Ben, at one point you were doing like 2, 3 episodes a week with like really, really big names. Like, how come you're not always doing it 3 times a week anymore?" And I realized at one point, and I'm all about, trust me, habits and all that
Yep.
stuff. But I also think there needs to be that realness of a also we're also human, like being able to hold the space and give. It takes a lot of energy and all the
Hmm.
other things that people don't realize all the other hours that goes into producing an episode. There's so much, again, expression of art. And so something that I've recently in the last year learned is I have no problem staying consistent, staying on the journey, but not forcing, when an episode shouldn't come out. And it's not out of fear, it's more out of I want to think like a musician. They're not
Hmm.
always launching a new song every week, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes they take time and space to really reflect, really, really within, what are they trying to put out, if they want to have impact on themselves or the world. And sometimes it's okay to do a little bit less to have a little bit more impact. And so I've thought about that. I have some friends that are some really good, sorry, I have some friends that are some really good musicians.
Yep.
And they've really taken time, to okay, it's been maybe a year and a bit, and then they launched their new album, and you feel it. You feel through that
That
album that wow, it's so raw and it's so real and it's so expressive, and it wasn't because of perfection. They were just really being as authentic as they could be.
I think there's a really fascinating point with what you've just said. That this is one of my moments of, when my head kind of blows off thing. Is with that when you liken that to music, because the a musician, especially a songwriter and musician,
Hmm.
they need to get some life lived to
Hmm.
be able to percolate out the experience of that life lived into their art. And then if you just take that as being all art, there's influences and all the rest, but you've got to get some space to live.
Hmm.
And if you just fill everything with busyness, there's no space to live. And I know when I do series of podcasts, like I'll do a series of podcasts, what happens is that there is I might work I do one for the American Institute of Architecture, Austin, Texas. I do one every year. I sponsor their homes tour. And with that, I interview, I don't know, 12 different architects with a very kind of purposeful format. Bang, 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 bang. And I try and get them in within about a month and a half. So, and as well as keeping my podcast going with my other guests as well. And it's almost a point of overwhelm where I can't clearly remember the stories from each podcast from them and then the other guests I'm putting in along the way, because then I drop theirs as a series and I go, there's no space to breathe in it sometimes. And I don't know whether that affects the quality of the podcast, but it certainly affects my quality of absorption. of that knowledge. And I see that and I go, I really take the point of having that space in it. I've got a last question for you because I know you've got a time limit because you've got something really exciting to go and do as well. If you only had one last episode to record for your podcast, Living Your Greatness, and there was one last episode, and after that, you can't have another episode. So this is the legacy episode that you leave behind. You know, the question's coming. Who do you choose to fill that space with you for an hour or 2 hours?
That's a very good question. I don't want to avoid the answer. I want to be very authentic, but I'm going to describe, the person maybe that I would want to
Yeah.
have that final talk with. And it's honestly more than ever. I know I said this to you before hopping on and then even right now, but it's people that are more than ever leading from their heart. I think
Mm-hmm.
more than ever in the world, like when I always look at like, the good, the bad, the ugly in the world, right? There's a lot of bad, but there's a lot of beauty,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we could choose to always see the bad, or we could learn from it and know, okay, it exists, that is real, but what about all the other beauty? And I think, I don't know, just more than ever, like without going into specific life examples, but whether it's, financially, it's tough times, or whether it's, even, you brought up before, like, okay, in some ways, technology is consuming, all these young minds so much. Well, I agree with you, but at the same time, I've also seen, some maybe Gen Zs that I teach know how to set boundaries and know how to leverage all the beauty now that it brings. And so I think most importantly, it's like I would love to interview just someone that is actually, you know what? I got an answer for you now that we are talking. So when we were talking about artistry, in the last little bit,
Mm-hmm.
there's someone, and honestly, it was an experience for me. If you look up on Know Thyself podcast, and if you look up Ryx, he's a musician. I don't know if you've heard of him. And he's been touring the world and just you feel it, eh? Like you feel almost like in every song, when things were maybe really hard. And I don't know if he's always referring to, break up or this or that, but you feel that rawness. Like you feel that he's coming from a place of feeling whatever the feelings those are and portraying it out in such an artistic way. But it's not just through like his music or his songs. You see it through just like even sounds funny, but even like, what you display, even over social media, you could see the authenticity, and how much heart he is not afraid to just put out there. And so I had already known of Ryx and love his music. But then after listening to that episode, he even performed too, or I don't want to use performed.
Yeah.
He
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 gave.
he definitely created art, and that was really cool, and presented that vulnerability because art is vulnerability. But I would say that whole interview, I was like, wow, here's someone that like rarely gets interviewed, and what a gift that was, to hear him speak, hear his voice, and hear the amount of wisdom and knowing that like it came from, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly probably in his life. And so ever since that conversation, I'm happy that you brought it up because again, there's so many people out there that would probably be, authentic or lead from the heart. But he's someone recently I'm like, okay, I gotta reach out to him soon, or
Yeah.
or maybe I want to start a series, on that theme. And he's the first one to kind of set the bar. But he's tremendous. And yeah, I definitely recommend challenge you. I challenge like your viewers. Actually, I want to say invite. Invite is probably a better
Yep.
word, but I invite you guys to check out that episode. I resonated a lot with it.
So it was
And
Know Thyself podcast and
yeah,
Ryx, the musician.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be listening to it today. I've got all day ahead of me. And like that's that kind of thing. I just recently, so one of my great inspirations, even pre-podcasting, was Chase Jarvis and Chase Jarvis Live, and just yeah, his cut through and stuff. And just the other day, I reached out to Chase and on his Instagram, And
Yeah.
he came back and said, "Hey, here's who you need to be in touch with to see if we can put a booking together." And I'm like, "Wow, okay, cool." Like that was, and I mean, he's not necessarily the last one that if I had only one to do, I've
Yeah.
got thousands to do, but it was like that thing
Same.
of
Same
going,
here.
"Yeah,
Same here. And I'm glad that you said that because I want everyone to take the lesson there. Like people have asked me, like, oh, how do you get these guests? And oh my God, like, wait, you got that person? Like I follow their work. It's like, again, that was part of my mission, right? Is people forget sometimes that they have these self-limiting beliefs that hold them back from living out their full potential, right? And
mm,
it's like I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. You
oh
just
yeah."
said it, but just try, reach out. And when you reach out, speak from the heart. Like they usually feel it, and whether it's them or their assistant. I
Yeah.
can't remember the whole study, but I think Tim Ferriss in his book, he talked about challenging, I don't know which university he was at, but like to reach out to three CEOs that they think,
Yeah, right.
would maybe never respond to the email. And I think what was like the percentage? It was like, I don't know, don't quote me on this, but let's say it was like 88% of these high level CEOs responded or their assistant responded.
Somebody responded for them,
It
yeah,
was
if not
extremely
them.
high. So
Yeah.
I told people that it's like people limit themselves of having access to
Mm,
opportunities because they already shut down the opportunity before even trying to open the door.
yeah.
And also my other thing I would say, not to do this with the wrong intention, but there's nothing wrong with if you don't hear from someone once to, life gets
Ask
busy,
again.
to ask again, or also
Mm.
try maybe different ways to get in touch to people. So maybe try email instead of Instagram, And so I just want to plug in that right there too, is to again persevere a bit.
I'd add to that as well. Offer some value, and I don't mean offering necessarily money. I would say when you're making an offer to somebody to come on your show, tell them why you value them, and what you would hope to get from that value exchange, like from that thing. I know when I wrote to Chase, I said, "Man, you inspired me right back at this point, like way back here." And I've followed his stuff ever since. And these were key points that have inspired me in that journey, like of his journey. And
Mhm.
there's been he opened again another kind of window for me that opened things up. Wayne Dyer was the first person who opened a window for me. And I went, oh wow, look at all this world out here that's like this. And then, Chase was one of those people I came across as Chase Jarvis live show and went, oh wow, okay. And then started listening to his guests and then went, yeah, right. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. And I never even thought about it in a podcast concept. I just looked at it or context. I just looked at it as filling me up with something. And then later, when I started a podcast, I went, oh, like, yeah, just these different people. I have a long list of names of people that I go, yeah, at some point I want to get them on the podcast. And the one I regret the most is I didn't record my father, and he now has Alzheimer's, and so I can never record him,
No,
and
I,
someone
I,
so close.
I hear you, and I think that's something that echoes sometimes in the back of my mind is sometimes I'm like, man, like you never know. And again, I'm not trying to sound negative, but you never know when it's someone's last day.
Hmm.
And so something that I try and challenge myself, and I don't know if you do it, but sometimes when you have a thought of that next guess, to not hold back, like even me
Go.
having you as you asked me that question, I was like, actually, no, right. X, like even though I've been busy on this series that I'm doing right now or my last series, he's someone like I'm just so curious to get to know more and to showcase what I value of how he's impacted my life.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, man. Thank you so much for your authenticity, and I know that I don't think you turn up any other way. I don't think there's another you that hides behind the you
Uh,
that we see, and that really shows through, and it really comes through, in your podcast, but also today. I really appreciate that. And I've taken a huge page of notes, and some of my favorites were, people artist. I've never heard the term before, and it resonates so much. And the four P's of just, get this, just this is life shit. Just put it in, and just being so honest about how it all comes about and how it works and sharing your knowledge. Really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you too, and I mean it. Like I appreciate your energy. I appreciate your mindset to want to do better, not just for yourself or your friends
Mm.
or your family, but even to share that. It's a gift to hold the space, not just for yourself, but to hold it for others. So I totally respect, the way that you choose to show up. It's a choice.
Cheers, man.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for tuning into our conversation. I hope it left you both informed and inspired. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. And please don't hesitate to share your design thoughts with me. It's always a joy to hear from you. If you're like me and crave a deeper dive into design thinking, coupled with a love for travel and adventure, consider one of my architectural adventures. Join me and some of my wonderful design friends and embark on a journey of a lifetime. Apply for an unforgettable design experience at adrianramsey.com. With our clients spanning the globe, I firmly believe behind every great project are great people. If you're a great person and seeking to turn your dream into a reality, I'd be honored to design your home with you. Why not join the ranks of our exceptional clients and let's make your heart sing? Reach out to me at studio@ardesignhouse.com. That's studio@ardesignhouse.com, and let's get a conversation going and make your heart sing.